Artificial intelligence is moving faster than many organizations expected. Today, 92% of companies plan to increase their AI investment over the next 3 years, yet only 1% believe they have reached true governance maturity. Here in South Africa, AI is already part of everyday business, with 72% of employees using AI tools several times each week. The question is no longer whether organizations will adopt AI. The question is whether digital governance and board-level digital oversight are evolving at the same pace. AI has the potential to strengthen decision-making, improve efficiency, and support innovation. But without AI accountability, strategic oversight, and responsible governance, it also introduces new operational, ethical, and strategic risks that boards cannot afford to ignore. The organizations that succeed won't simply invest in artificial intelligence. They will build governance that enables innovation, strengthens trust, and prepares their boards to lead with confidence in the digital era. That's what governance as a digital catalyst is all about. Join the conversation at the Fluid Rock Conference 2026.
At PSG Capital, we see every challenge as an opportunity. We thrive on turning complexity into clarity, driven by innovation and an entrepreneurial spirit in everything we do. We work closely with our clients, listening, understanding, and shaping strategies that meet their unique needs. Our commitment to excellence shines through in every transaction, while our independence ensures advice that is objective and uncompromised. As an award-winning corporate finance firm, we deliver the full spectrum of services, from mergers and acquisitions to listings, capital raisings, restructurings, valuations, and sponsor services. Proudly South African, yet reaching across Africa and beyond, we deliver world-class capability with a local touch. Great relationships matter. For decades, we've been instrumental in the growth and success of our clients. We give you the confidence to lead, the tools to succeed, and the insight to navigate an ever-changing world. PSG Capital. Independent thinking, absolute.
Anything is possible in this earth. So you must not limit yourself. Just be you and then do what you do best, and the outcomes will come.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce just the three panel members for us. I thought that the first person that I need to introduce is Advocate Annemarie van der Merwe. Currently, she's become a radio star. Being on the radio, every time we turn on a radio station, she's there. Last night, she was on RSG, and obviously, as usual, done that. There's not a lot of things I can say about Annemarie, other than if governance had a wall of fame, she most probably would have her own wing. She has been in corporate governance for 33 years. She's part of the King Commission. She guides us. She's also the individual that actually challenges the whole time in terms of how do we run business, how do we govern, never settle fundamentally for average. So Annemarie's going to lead the panel for us in terms of that. Then we've got Kobus Locher, and so the CV is actually quite impressive, so I have to actually read it. Unfortunately. Kobus is a chartered accountant. He started his career at KPMG. One of the interesting things with him is he then went to Virgin Active. And then now leading one of the biggest independent corporate or education corporations in South Africa. What we see with Kobus, which is quite interesting, is that things can work from the gym to the sports field into the classroom. And he's been leading us quite well in terms of that, showing that leadership doesn't stop in one context, but moves beyond. So Kobus, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And then the next person is Logan Hufke, which is our deal maker. They say that in South Africa, if you want to know about deal making, she's the person that you go to. If there's a complex deal in the works or actually being settled, she's the one that will be busy untangling it. She has two mantras. One of them is relationships. And then the second one, which makes sense, is confidentiality. Those two things are the things that actually makes her a success. She's been rewarded 2024 for the deal maker of the year. She's been involved not only in this transaction, but specifically also in the WeBuy Cars transaction and a number of others. So I want to welcome you to our offices and then hand over to our chair, Annemarie.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, welcome for those in the room. Welcome those online with us this morning. Really an exciting topic we're going to talk about. You know, kind of when I saw that, the first of all, this is revolutionary. That's such a big word, revolutionary. But I'm really keen to delve into that and to get a little bit of a deeper understanding. And towards the end, we will also open the floor and online for questions. So you're very welcome to also, pose your own questions. But I think before we start talking, maybe let's, Logan, let's start with you to give us a little bit of the detail.
Yeah.
The facts, the hard detail. And it was kind of for you to share a little bit of your thinking and how, your side of the story. And then we'll talk a little bit on some of the aspects.
Okay.
Logan, you're going to start.
All right. So, hi everyone, and thanks so much for being here. We thought we would just give you a little snapshot of PSG Capital for those who don't know. So we are a leading corporate finance house in South Africa, end-to-end corporate finance services, as you can see. Importantly, also a JSE sponsor with around 40 or so listed clients. But there's a little snapshot. I won't spend too much time. This is a brilliant slide. We can spend a lot of time on it. It shows all our nominations and awards over the last couple of years. So maybe just digest this. Okay, and then on to the transaction. So I won't go into all the detail. I'll let Kobus do some of that. But I think at the outset, it's important to understand the context and the framework. So who is the offeror here and what is the transaction? So at a high level, and we'll go through the details and all the different mechanics of the transaction in the slides which follow. But basically, this was a scheme of arrangement, an offer by the Jannie Mouton Stichting or Foundation to acquire all the shares of Curro by way of a scheme of arrangement with an interesting mix of the purchase consideration and to facilitate the delisting of Curro from the JSE as bucket one. So that was the key transaction for which we needed shareholder approval and all the different fancy approvals. But the immediate next step was that Curro then repurchased all the shares that the foundation purchased for R1. So that is where the donation element comes in, and converted them to a public benefit organization and nonprofit. So the revolutionary nature of this transaction is that although on face value it may seem like it's an acquisition by a foundation and it's a scheme of arrangement, we see that all the time. Beyond the nuances of the detail, which we'll unpack now, it's a donation in its core, because the offeror which acquired the shares never really owned those shares. They owned the shares for a moment in time. So I think just hold on to that throughout the theme, because that is the context of the transaction. So who is this offeror? What is a stichting, firstly? A stichting is a foundation. And Yanni Maton is also our founder of PSG and PSG Capital, who's also the founder and started this foundation in 2004. A next key milestone is in 2017, Yanni donated 10 million PSG Group shares to the foundation. Now, at the time of that donation, PSG Group was also a listed company on the JSE with a whole lot of subsidiary. It was an investment holding company with a whole lot of other listed companies which it owned, including Curro, Capitec, PSG Financial Services, or PSG Consult, as some of you may know it. So if you look through, the foundation hold the PSG Group shares, but look through to all these underlying companies. In 2020, PSG Group unbundled its Capitec shares. So what an unbundling is basically the PSG Group takes its shareholding in Capitec and gives it to all its shareholders. In 2022, PSG Group did the same for basically all its other listed shares. There were some listed portfolios which stayed behind, but most of those shares were also unbundled. So it meant that from a foundation perspective, instead of now holding PSG Group shares, they hold, amongst others, Curro shares, Capitec shares, and PSG Financial Services. So this is the asset base, if I can call it that, of the foundation at the time. And the purpose of the foundation was to, and remains now, it's basically for the public good in South Africa, to alleviate poverty with a specific focus on education. So Yanni's wish and desire has always been to make quality education accessible in South Africa, which I think Cobus aligns identically with what Curro's ambitions and mission statement is. So that's the context of who the foundation is and how they came about to hold these shares. And I think you can see where we're going, and given the link to Yanni, to the foundation, for us, this transaction, for us as PSG Capital, this transaction, and for me personally, is once in a lifetime, absolutely incredible to have led and advised on, because it's not often that you really see this kind of good being done on such a broad philanthropic basis. So this is a little bit about Curro. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because Cobus is much better placed to have this conversation than I am. But key things, Curro is listed in 2011. You can see the kind of share price, and I think Cobus will touch on it more. But the key thing to just bear in mind is the Curro story, I think, and Cobus, you'll agree, everyone understands and supports. It's an incredible independent schooling group. I think everyone in the room knows someone who goes to a Curro or whose child goes to, it's a household name in South Africa. However, from an investor perspective, I think given the long capital cycle of building a schooling group and building out schools and seeing those returns versus investors wanting returns quicker, there's a little bit of a mismatch there from a listed perspective. Obviously, that is removed in an unlisted environment, and more so in a public benefit space where the whole purview changes on what you are making surplus or profit for, where that goes and what you can then do. But Cobus, again, better placed than me. This is just high level. So as I said, the transaction consideration was interesting in its mix. What I meant by that is it comprised three things: Capitec shares, PSG Financial Services shares, and cash. Now, the reason that's interesting is usually in a scheme of arrangement where there's shares used as consideration, It's the offeror who issue shares to make that payment. In this case, as I mentioned earlier, the foundation held all these different listed shares. So they used other shares that they own to pay for the Curro shares. Now, the reason that works is because if you look at even without looking at the financial metrics of these shares, which is on the next slide, the names, again, household names. No, I don't think anyone's going to say, no, I don't want a Capitec share, right? So we had to obviously make sure that the share consideration, it's good shares, there's growth prospects attaching to those shares, and that they're high performing, because otherwise no one's going to want to give up a Curro share for a lesser or even an equivalent type share. So that was the transaction mix. That in and of itself led to quite a lot of complexity from a regulatory perspective, because it's unusual in its nature. So we kind of had to get creative and work with regulators like the Takeover Regulation Panel to figure out how we're going to do this and what confirmations they need to allow it. Because usually if you have a cash consideration, you have to give them a guarantee or some kind of proof that you do have the money you say you have. So we had to mirror that for the shares, because it's not an issue. So you must prove to me you do have the shares you say you're going to pay with. There was quite a nuance in that regard. So that's the interesting share consideration. This is where we'll spend most of our time. I think there was a huge mix, and generally in these transactions there's a lot of regulatory oversight. I think what I found interesting in just engaging normal people in the street, once the transaction was announced, is everyone kind of said, oh, but it should be so easy because it's for such good. But from a regulatory perspective, that's not the way it works. So if anything, it was actually a little bit more complicated because it was so unique, and you have to prove that you are actually doing what you say you're doing. So you can see all the regulators on the screen. I think SARS played a very big role initially, because in order to register as a public benefit organization, you need SARS approval to do that. And this is obviously very unique, because you're going from a profit company listed to now a public benefit organization, non-profit company with no shareholders. So CIPC as well, they were key in the beginning, because kind of like, can you actually do this? Like, we understand what you're trying to achieve, but is this possible? And like, what is the timing? How does it all interplay? And I must say they were very, very helpful. It also bears mentioning that given the consideration that we were paying listed shares, our timeline, my strong instruction was to implement this yesterday. So we didn't have a lot of time. And I think we did well, Cobus. We did it in 4 months. What was it ultimately?
Well, we could have been a little bit quicker. But,
yes, but there was some regulators who didn't play ball. But and the reason is these shares are trading in the market, right? And they're good shares and we believe in the prospects, but no one has a crystal ball. You don't know for sure if something happens and now the value drops. Now you go for a shareholder vote and they go, I actually don't want that share for whatever reason. So we didn't have any room for error or room to dilly-dally. So we had to get on with it. So SARB always plays a role, for any delisting, you need to get exchange control approval. But SARS and the CIPC here were very key initially, as I said. And again, very unique engagement given how unique this proposal was. We did get every approval we need, just everyone's comfortable. We did do it the way we were supposed to. The other interesting one, I'm going to leave the best one for last, but the other interesting too is always the Takeover Regulation Panel and the JSE always play a role in these transactions, because they are regulated under the Companies Act, and they're also, obviously it's a listed company, so the JSE plays its part. I think those processes went quite well. The Takeover Regulation Panel process was very intricate. Again, because there's so many nuances, there are very specific rules in the takeover code. And in order to comply with those in this unique situation, we had to kind of figure it out with the takeover, with the TRP. And I must say, they did really come to the party to facilitate and to work with us to find solutions, because it's not about blocking from their perspective. I think it's not about blocking the transaction. It's just about making sure you're doing things the right way. And it's actually quite interesting from a corporate governance perspective as well, because a lot of the panel rules have built-in guardrails from a governance perspective to ensure that things are done on an independent basis and in the best interest of shareholders, actually, on an objective view. So, for example, from the way we were operating it, we had to assist Curro to form an independent board, to accept the offer, to understand the offer. We also had independent sponsors appointed because we were Curro sponsors, so to oversee the process, also from a JSE perspective, to make sure that there are checks and balances and walls where they need to be. So our engagements with Querbus, for example, are separate to our engagements with the independent board. Querbus is basically like, do not speak to the independent board. Let's not taint the independence. They need to appoint an independent expert to give an opinion on the fairness and reasonability of the offer. Again, from an independent expert perspective, very limited engagement. Obviously, there's some management engagement because they need guidance on the financial information we're presenting, but it's like a meeting and then that's it. They must go do their work. So those are built-in guardrails to ensure an independent and robust process so that what's presented to shareholders ultimately is something thought through by people who are far removed from it and can give an honest opinion and put all the facts on the table. From an independent board member's perspective, I think it's actually quite difficult because they are asked to present this offer. They're asked to provide guidance on financial information and all these things that they aren't necessarily the closest to, as Querbus would be as an executive in the company. So it is a lot of responsibility, but it's the advisor's role and responsibility to enable them to do that, and also from an independent expert perspective to give the board comfort that they can say this, they recommend it, or to give them comfort to say we don't recommend it based on the metrics. So that's interesting. I think the other part that, going back to the timing issue and doing this with no time, is if Curro was a company that didn't have a corporate governance framework in place and proper reporting and all of those, it would have been impossible, because then we are retrofitting to provide information to regulators, to be able to produce a circular, to be able to give views to shareholders. That wasn't the case. So props to Querbus and his team, is that I could ask for something, you ask for a board minute, you ask for whatever it may be, it exists in a format that makes sense. And importantly, and I think Querbus will touch on it more, but it's not to say that because they were a JSE listed company, that's the reason that it's in place and now it's gone. Because you may not have to report to shareholders anymore, but you do have to report to SARS on an annual basis. And personally, I would not want to report to SARS on an annual basis in any manner that's incorrect, right? So that doesn't disappear. The lender base that Curro has before and after the scheme is the same. Their requirements in terms of reporting and insight into the business remains unchanged. So you still need to operate your business in the same with the same degree of governance. Otherwise, it doesn't work ultimately. So it's not. I think actually there's a lot more regulation now, because we're saying we're doing all these things for the public good. You have to show that you are, and you have to show that you are every year, which is tricky. And then lastly, the Competition Commission. So we had 3 competition filings, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. And competition filings, specifically in South Africa, are always complex. So I think we all preempt that it's going to not be smooth sailing. I think maybe naively, I at least thought that this may be smooth sailing, given the absolute public benefit that is being unlocked through this transaction. But it was a difficult process. It was, let's leave it at that. It was a challenging. Rigorous, yeah. And ultimately, it delayed us a little bit, but we got there in the end. So I think, like the other regulators, it also took a lot of explaining and just really to understand the basis and what we are seeking to achieve forever. And I think that's the other key part of this transaction, is that there's no end date. This is for in perpetuity forever. And that goes to the governance requirements as well, is in order for this to work the way everyone wants it to work and envisions it working, you need to make sure that things continue post-Querbus, post anyone that we know today. It must operate in the same way and in the right way. And in order to achieve that, you need to have good corporate governance. You have to continue to report to regulators and external people so that, you have some oversight. You need some independence there to make sure that the vision, everything we're so proud of from Yanni's vision, and we implemented it, that in 50 years and 100 years, that golden thread remains. And that's a corporate governance key cornerstone and key to any kind of successful operation in this way. So that is kind of the regulatory mix and the complexities. There's another slide that I removed which shows from a corporate finance perspective how we see transactions working. So you have your origination, and then you do your marketing, and then you engage, and then you find implement. And it's interesting because that is the way that we see it in our minds, but it's never the way it works. This is the way it works. That's why I like the web. It's all kind of happening at the same time, and it's intertwined, and you have to preempt issues, but you also have to pivot when issues pop up that you maybe didn't preempt. And I think in this case, what was helpful is that the story is so strong, the objectives were so strong. So where you get questions on public interest and things like that, it was actually very simple to answer because it speaks for itself. And obviously there's the creativity which is required in order to, what's the saying, Mish? To build the plane as you fly it, essentially, because you're all kind of learning together. So high level, or not so high level, I spoke a lot. That was the transaction and some of the complexities and some of the learnings. But I'll hand over to Querbus for.
Thanks, Logan.
More.
We're going to chat a little bit more later on this. Thanks, Querbus.
Thanks, Logan. Okay, so that's not the right slide.
We will quickly later.
It's all about building the plane as you fly. You see.
Yes. I don't think the next one's going to be right either. Yeah.
This is like a teacher, no? Class, any questions? Done with the lesson.
Yeah, I guess the best teachers get to the questions quicker because that's often where the learning happens.
Yeah.
So I think, it was and thanks for inviting Curro to this. We're delighted to, I guess, tell our story because we have a good story to tell. And I think some really a really important mission to fulfill. So thanks for sharing your time with us. So I've done a few short slides and I've kind of given them kind of guide you through the thing, but slightly on a principled maybe level rather than a technical one. And I think Logan's dealt with that. So I think what are the kind of things we learned and what are the things that make a difference? And probably the single most important bit about a complex transaction was to probe the regulators relatively early in the process to determine what was possible or not, and to build the kind of relationships to engage. And I think that's probably a tip for all of us is that sometimes we try difficult things and we want to ask at the end and maybe ask at the beginning. I think Logan and the team did an amazing job to kind of really confirm a path. This was complex. It really was. We've done things that has never been done before and is unlikely to be repeated anytime soon. So it was very unique. And it was a lot of fun because it was tricky, but PSG Capital did an amazing job to set a path. And she's right. We could probably have executed the thing a little bit quicker. Because the value of the shares was a bit of a pressure point, in other words, the compensation for Curro. The corporate advisors, I referred to that in point 3. I think it's really powerful to surround yourself with good people, and that's true in your business as well as around your business. So I think, in the case of PSG Capital, we've built a long relationship with them and advising and assisting and being involved with Curro. And so that was very powerful because they understood the business well. And then the whole concept eventually to register as a PBO is an incredible milestone. And when we started talking about this in kind of July last year, it was kind of a dream. It was an idea. And it really came together very, very quickly and effectively. So that was, it really is it's a very dynamic process, but surround yourself with good people and test the concepts early. if I talk about Curro, I mean, I get this question a lot. Is it a lot easier now that you're not listed? Like you don't have any more work, okay? And it's nonsense, isn't it? It can't be, because I've got the same 72,000 earners, and I've got their kind of 100,000 parents, and I've got my 8,000 staff, and I've got their families, and I've got the communities that we serve, and I've got the broader aspirations of the country and of many other communities. So it can't be about simpler because your shareholder changes. Your task and your mission is the same. And that really speaks to that concept of purpose. We managed to get 14 billion rand over the last 25 years to acquire and build schools. We got that from shareholders, we got that from banks, debt, and so on and so on. And to get that kind of capital to fulfill the mission of extending education, that demands a return for a shareholder, demands interest for a bank, demands sustainability, credibility, predictability, all those good things. So on the right-hand side, the kind of importance and the responsibility to achieve that is real commercially. And for many people, it was at odds with the issue of purpose. And there are people who were cynical about people who profit out of education. How can you do that? Like it's a little bit curious for me, because somehow it's okay if you profit out of food, which is like basically keeps you alive. Okay, but it's not okay if you profit from education. And I think in a country where resources can be scarce and opportunities few, we must harness everything we've got to expand the opportunity set. And if it means we must get shareholder involvement and corporate investment, all those things, we must do that in a responsible and credible way. And I think we've demonstrated what's possible if you do that. But on the left-hand side is why most of the 8,000 people who work for Curro get out of bed every morning. It's not to make a profit for a shareholder. It's to care for a child. It's to coach a team. It's to work with a choir. It's to help a child achieve their dreams. That's why they kind of focus. And I think what we managed to do over a long time was to strike a balance. And the balance is in the professionalism with which we execute. And much of what this morning's forum is about is actually about professionalism. Because the commercial discipline must fund the mission. But the mission is the reason that must exist in the first place. And I think if we can really understand that as a society, I think it'll be so much easier, because that can only foster collaboration. So professionalism must be the standard by which we balance the commercial acumen and the drive and the ambition and all those things with the deep caring of our purpose. I get this a lot from my teams, staff. This kind of tacit accusation that, oh, this is just so corporate. I mean, like somewhere, like every morning they meet in an office and find ways to make our life difficult. It's like Machiavellian. It's like Blofeld and Bond or something, okay, with a cat, But the reality is there's a real difference and a distinction. And I think if we can grasp that, it helps. I've never met anybody who was insulted when I said, just like it was professional. You such a pro. That was so well executed, so professional, well done. But the moment you say, oh, that was so corporate, it kind of dulls it, and sometimes it's a little bit insulting because it's hollow. Rules followed for their own sake. Distance between decision makers and the people who actually engage with the customer. Compliance without real, I guess, integrity or an honest purpose behind it. Hierarchy that protects itself. That could be compliance. And I would suggest that in many of the organizations in our world where we struggle, sometimes that's pervasive. But the inverse is also true. If you find people who can do things with care, because that's just what it takes. because I care for the person in front of me. If we can drive accountability, that actually serves the customer. Not my job description or the rules or something else, but it just serves the customer and has their best interest at heart. If we can have standards that are clear and honestly explained and are well understood, not because there are rules, but because there are concepts that matter. So I think from our perspective, we've got a large organization. And the risk is that you become some kind of corporate behemoth. And that can be defeatist. That can kind of destroy the sort of intimacy and the sensitivity that is so relational in our world in particular. Because we really live by a credo that every child matters. But we have 72,000 of them. And every employee matters. But we've got 8,000 of them. And so it does demand a world where you can focus on customers and do so with real empathy, real professionalism. And that must be like visible. It can't be just something on a wall somewhere. I'm generally amused with visions and like values and things if they're not stated as verbs. Action. I think it's different to say integrity on the wall versus be honest in everything that you do. You true to yourself. I think that they land differently. In our organization, one of our sort of values is to care deeply. I talk to staff and I ask them, what should you expect of me as a leader and what do I expect of you? It is to care deeply. And you can't define it. You can't contain deeply. But it's universally understood. So, with all that said, where does the standard come from? The standard cannot just be because of your ownership, your listed status. Because that in itself presupposes that listed sort of businesses are more holy and better than others, which we know is not the case. And that in itself is problematic. So our standard is not about who owns us. Can't be. It's actually defined by who we serve. That's the moral standard that we must hold, and it's a very, very high one. When you care for other people's children, and you've got to sort of develop their potential. So schools and educators have a really high ethical demand, and it's tough. It's tough. If you're in retail, you see your customer maybe once a week, maybe a bit more if you're lucky. In some niche businesses, a few times a year. And management teams spend a lot of time trying to work out how can we see our customer more often? How do I market? How do I have more engagement? How do I see them more regularly? We see our customers every single day for most of the day. And that's fraught with risk because we have all this opportunity to like them and to work with them, but there's so many moments where you can get it wrong. And we do. And we must allow room for that as well. So our delisting really, I guess, confirmed what we already knew, which was that our standard was not dependent on our listed status. It wasn't the JSE regulations that governed how good we were, or the Umalusi requirements from the Department of Education, or the King 5 Code, or the Company Act of South Africa. It was very much a function of the profession itself, an ethical standard that we must hold and must maintain and must protect. So I think that's probably something, and I think it's in my experience in business, and I've worked in different businesses and I've done different things. I've worked in private equity environments, in listed, in small kind of like owner operators, in public benefit kind of worlds. And the answer is always the same. If you maintain a high standard, that's universal, and it can be maintained by everybody. And it's about how you behave. So it's not about the rules. It's about how you behave. So it's got to run deeper. So I think from our perspective, Curro, as I said earlier, can't be very different today from what it was a year ago or 6 months ago. Because we got the same amazing potential running through our corridors, sitting in our classrooms, spending time on stages and sports fields. That's the same. So we can't be very different, and we shouldn't, and we won't, because the standard that we must maintain is exceedingly high. So the same discipline, we've still got to generate a surplus because this thing must sustain. It can't become a struggling entity that falls over at the first sort of cough or symptom of anything. So we've got to be sustainable. So commercially, we must apply the same kind of rigor, same discipline. And my banks will be delighted to hear that because I owe them a few billion still, and they'd like to get that back. But that's a healthy thing. We're a legitimate force for good. We have always been. And it's interesting for me and our new guys how people are less cynical about that. It's probably the biggest change I've experienced is how many more parent communities are engaging with us to say, how can we get involved? Because it's a little bit less transactional with the sort of evil profiteer. So every rand of surplus has to be, by the very sort of status as a PBO, reinvested in education. And that's very, very exciting and very powerful. But for us, what it really means is that we can accelerate the good that we do. We can get to things quicker because we got hundreds of millions of rands extra that previously would have had to be paid to shareholders as a return on their funds. So the same rigor, the same caring context, and that is as true for professionally how we run the organization as how we care for our learners and our staff. So what it really opens is an incredible platform for partnership. And in virtually, I'm just such a big believer in this concept. I don't subscribe to the kind of theme of the hero CEO or the hero, I don't know, like particular individual leader. I've seen it all the time. It's always about teams. You guys are probably all part of very successful teams. And I think you understand what I mean. And it takes too much from any single individual to get things right. It is always about the tenacity and the resilience and the experience and the wisdom of a team. So what we think is that there's an incredible opportunity. We already currently are working with a large foundation that is getting about 40 million rand a year from various corporates and are funding over 900 learners in our schools. That's incredibly powerful. And we can do more of that. We can do much, much more of that. I've seen so many corporates who are looking to do good, looking to make a difference. There's so many philanthropic organizations registered to do that. The state, the sports associations, there's so many organizations out there who does not have our scale, our facilities, our capabilities, our staff body, our kind of governance and our ethical standard to care for learners. And so it's a very powerful opportunity to work with us. And we don't see education, there's 13 million learners in this country. There's 25,000 schools. Anybody who thinks that they can have education to themselves is mad. It's not possible. It's by its very nature collaboration between parents, communities, learners, everybody in the ecosystem. It can't really be a competitive thing. I mean, to some extent it is, but particularly if you have big derbies on a Saturday afternoon. But the reality is it must be a collaborative process. And we think that we have a wonderful opportunity to facilitate. We are already facilitating South Africa's biggest athletics competitions, biggest esports competitions, biggest soccer, football competitions. There's so many things that we do, which are not just for us. Hundreds of other schools and thousands of other learners get opportunities as a result of that. And so we think it's a very powerful opportunity. This PBO status endorses that and hopefully opens up more that we can do together. So, and then from our perspective, we've got a little bit of debt to repay over the next few years. And so this chapter in the immediate future is one of probably relative similar behavior for Curro. But within a few years, we should be able to build more, expand what we have, add facilities, expand education through scholarships, bursaries, and arguably kind of contain the cost of independent education because we would be debt-free and we can redeploy that kind of return as well into the parcel. So that's a very powerful opportunity. But I don't want to wait 5 years before I get into that stuff. I want to work with corporates already to start doing good. And there's amazing things that's already happening. People like Capitec, KFC, Exaro, and many others who are already involved, and it's very, very powerful. So maybe in conclusion then, and I've said this, we see ourselves as facilitators. We're liberators. It's not about winning, about dominating, about owning something. It's about really fostering and creating opportunity. We built buildings that can accommodate about 100,000 kids. We've got 72,000 kids in there. We can take more. We've got fields that are not full every single day. We've got stages that are not full every single day. And those are there's so many opportunities. So I think for us that the donation from the Jannie Maton Stichting it's a game changer. Not because it changes who we are, but because it accelerates what we can be. It accelerates what we can be. So in my view, we don't have a shortage of talent in this country. See it every day. I'm blown away with what I see. I mean, I've spent like the last few days in Joburg, and I've been through about 10 schools. I'm just blown away by what I see. But we do have a shortage of opportunity. And we also in a moment where that opportunity set is shifting globally. Technology, various other kind of global trends we're not isolated from that. So we've got a job to do to prepare learners for a future that is going to be a little bit different. So we look forward to working with government, with donors, with corporates, with communities to extend many more opportunities to many more learners. And yeah, I guess I've got some enrollment forms, but my invitation really to this forum and to many others is to work with us and let's build opportunities together. You'll be blown away by what we can achieve. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. I both you and I'm sitting here thinking, well, maybe let me first lawyer up and kind of come with the company, the secretarial side about language and acronyms, and the correct use of those, because we often assume people know when we use these acronyms, and I've come across a lot of confusion around those. So maybe just very quickly for the benefit of the audience and all of us and our listeners. So we talk about the PBO, but from a legal perspective, what you became was from a public company, limited to an NPC, a non-profit company. Yeah. NPC, non-profit company without members.
That's
You've got no members, which is like really, from the shareholder body to no members who kind of hold you to account in inverted commas, but we'll talk about that just now. But because of the nature of what you do being called a public benefit activity, as an educator, you could register as a PBO in terms of the tax, which means for, not everybody may be that familiar with tax laws, which means you can actually issue a Section 18A certificate for any donors, and they can deduct that from tax. So it immediately opens the doors for donations, etc., because there's a tax benefit. And any legal entity, whether it's a trust, a voluntary association, or a non-profit company, can register as a PBO, as a public benefit organization. Then, of course, just this week was in a board meeting with a non-profit company and pointed out to them, because they trade over the borders of South Africa, they are by law now required to also register as an NPO, which is a different law, which is a non-profit organization. So you register as an NPO in terms of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. You've got you register with Department of Social Development, and you've got to comply with the requirements, and you will get an NPO registration. See, a PBO, you're an NPO, you're an NPC. And again, any kind of organization, a trust or a voluntary association or a non-profit company can register as an NPO in terms of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. So I thought, let me just quickly give that little bit of the land, maybe, of interest to some. But I think this whole transaction must have been met with, and like you both kind of alluded to it a little bit, quite a lot of cynicism, from different angles. And just Victor was referring to kind of the interview last night again that I had with Ryk van Niekerk, and that's kind of a negative sentiment came out in the discussion. Yes, you talk about the need for ethical leaders, but like, let's look at the scorecard, kind of thing. And kind of sounds like we're ready to give up. And then something like this happens and you're like, okay, what are we missing? There must be something here, and I'm sure I'm going to want to hear from you. Was that kind of what you felt with the regulators? Like, there's something we're missing here.
Yeah, so it's such an interesting take, because for once our transaction in the media was glorified, which is not always the case, right? Yeah. So the picture was really pretty and everyone was very excited. And as I said earlier, the assumption is then that the regulators must feel the same way. Was not the case. It was definitely, but what really, because why would you do this, right? Why would you buy these shares for 7.2 billion rand and sell it for a rand? Like, who does that? And I was like, Yanni Maton's foundation does that. So there was definitely a lot of that. And I think once you unpack it and you can show what the plans are going for, what you're actually trying to achieve, it becomes a little bit more palatable and a little bit more palatable. And then you start setting a little bit of guardrails within that. And you say, okay, we promise we will do these things and we'll report to you on these things. And then it starts to be like, okay, then we're feeling a little bit more comfortable, because it's not pie in the sky. You're not saying we will give more scholarships and we will expand and all these things. The commitments are a little bit firmer. And you hold to account in a way. So we had to walk that journey with them, but it wasn't a no-brainer in the first engagement. Yeah. No.
Like you thought it would be.
I thought it would be a slam dunk, but we were not glorified. No.
And I suppose you just alluded to it, that you had to make, there were certain expectations. Yeah. So obviously from a governance perspective, what were from a governance perspective some of the demands or expectations?
So obviously the existing framework is per a JSE listed company, for example. So the expectation from a broad base of stakeholders, we've obviously got lenders as well, not just regulators, was to maintain. So firstly, you want some level of continuity with the people, but also you want continuity in terms of the systems. And that was always the intention. So it wasn't a big give.
Yeah.
So that I think was one of the main ones. And from a lender's perspective as well, and Cobus alluded to it, is, okay, but if you now a charity, now the terminology becomes important. If you're now a charity, how are you going to pay me back? And from like a broad market perspective, it's like, oh, we're not charging school fees anymore. And that's why the point Cobus made is so perfect, is we still need to make money. We still need to run a business the way we ran a business, so that we can implement what we want to implement, so that we can do this forever and expand and give bursaries. If you don't make money, you can't do that. So it's that balance.
I just want to say that when your corporate advisor starts talking about we, as if she works with me and Curro, it's cool, isn't it? Thanks. But there's something I want to just raise, and I think it was, if you think about a lot of our governance structures are set up to protect the investor and or the shareholder, right? So conventionally, a lot of the protections around that. There's obviously other stakeholders that's dealt into it, but it's fascinating when you collapse that stakeholder. You say, well, there's no shareholder because we don't have shareholders. So it's fascinating because and that was some of the things we had to contend with this. But okay, how are you then going to be held accountable, and to whom? So that was an interesting, I guess, piece of the puzzle.
So to that point, elaborate for me a little bit, as the executive, how did you approach your board? Because like that cynicism from the regulator, how do you then approach the board to say, well, we want to do this radical shift from being listed to becoming a non-profit company without any members? How did that land with the board?
Well, look, the offer was made to the board, not to me. I'm just a humble manager who has to kind of do a lot of things. Okay, but so the board had to consider it, but fundamentally, the board had to satisfy themselves that we could guarantee the future success of all the learners under our care. And if anything, we could guarantee an even brighter future for them and an even brighter kind of opportunity set for our communities. And that's, I think, was given the proximity of the Jannie Mouton Stichting, in that they already owned Curro shares, that some of the family members had been kind of board members, and that they understood the business well, and that fundamentally the missions were absolutely aligned. I think that was important to establish early on. I think it would have been harder, and that's generally the thing in large transactions, is to work out whether the goal set is cohesive, because if it's disparate, that's where a lot of the tension, I think, often emanates from.
If you think about, the listed environment, and I think this is also, it's actually so obvious, but people don't think about it. Being listed is not a source of funding. In fact, I mean, the money of shares trade between the shareholders. You don't even see that money. All you have to do is you have to pay out dividends, because there are these expectations on you as well. Yeah, so they want to see a return on their investment as well. But now you've got that dividend money, and you can plow it back into your business, which is a great opportunity. And I loved listening to your language, how quickly you have pivoted from talking not about profit but surplus. So well done, because that's the thing in the non-profit. We don't talk profit, we talk surplus, but we need a surplus.
Rose by any other name.
No, absolutely. So the whole issue for me, and I was thinking while you were talking, I'm sure, still on the kind of cynicism kind of topic, I'm sure individuals when Curro listed was like, this is a dead dog. Who lists, no, I'm not going to touch this. This year said, shit, I should have done. I should have done that. That was an opportunity that I missed. So, to then, get Capitec and PSG shares in exchange for that. But it takes, I made the point last night as well that, yes, we are cynical about the scorecard, but I said that in the 35 years that I've been in this industry, the majority of people I've come across have been good people, upstanding people that want to leave organizations better off than they found it. So the Jannie Moutons of this world are there.
Yeah.
They are there. It's just that we also need to work harder in actually assisting them, empowering them to, when they are enabled to do something like this, to be able to do it.
Yeah.
For the greater good of society as well. I'm going to turn to the interest of time to the audience as well, and I'll check. I'm not sure whether we can check the online questions as well. So let's start with in the room. I'm quite sure you all are here with a different potentially angle of interest in this transaction. Some of you may actually be kind of looking at a huge transaction of this nature as well. So how do you actually approach it? What do you learn from Logan and Cobus, or just interested in this new non-profit environment? So let's hear what do we have any questions in the room? Yes.
First of all, a great presentation and such an interesting concept and what you've achieved. And I guess I'm still sort of thinking about, like, essentially what you've done is you've taken a business, right? And you've wrapped it in a nonprofit kind of wrapper now, and and a business, providing services, charging school fees. And so, and I guess fundamentally it's kind of still the same thing, but it's not. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on sort of, how what that change looked like. And I think Logan maybe hinted at it when you said something about, because I was thinking, well, you're still charging school fees, right? So that's what a business does. It's not sort of donation based, in terms of the business model. But maybe you can just talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, so there are 25,000 schools in South Africa. Of the 25,000 schools, there are 23,000 public schools, state schools, of which in 2,000 of them, I'm just rounding the numbers, in 2,000 of them, parents pay some fee towards the school. So 21,000 non-paying fees, 2,000 public schools where parents pay fees, and another 2,000 independent schools where parents pay fees. And there's a range of fees. And these 2,000 independent schools have been created over many years. Some of them are more than 100 years old. And I think in the first instance, last time I checked, we still have a free market and people can make decisions for themselves. And so if over time, in 2,000 instances, a society has created a school to suit a particular need, a particular a kind of requirement, they're in an area where there is not a school, they're looking for something. I think that should be celebrated. And I think the extent to which there are, and that caters for nearly 800,000 learners in this country and delivers significant excellence across the portfolio, across a broad base at different price points. It's not just for the elite or for rich people. There's a broad base there. There's church schools. There's all sorts of things there. Then you got another 800,000 kids in fee-paying public schools, which are also delivering significant excellence. So to some extent, the concept of paying a fee for a service should be common cause. I think it's, if you can, you must, and you should contribute and you should kind of pay your way. So there's that kind of concept. I guess in our society, given the history and the challenges that we face, it's hard when people don't get opportunities simply because of their history and their background. And that's what we've got to try and solve for. So I think from our perspective, we've got to be careful to say if something is a business, it's evil. I think we've got to be careful to sort of even insinuate that, because it doesn't have to be the case. A business is somebody that serves a purpose at a fee that makes sense to deliver that service. And if the service is as valuable and as important as education is, we should encourage more of it, and we should partner more, and we should collaborate more to stimulate and support and subsidize that. So I think from our perspective, it's not really about whether business is now sort of kind of masqueraded as something else. It's really about commercial acumen, applying expertise, being able to afford top experts and if you're in a hospital, you want the best possible care, and ditto for our kids. We should extend the best possible care, but we may have to pay to get that, and either facilities and or staff. So I think the concept is that what we're hoping to do in the fullness of time, schools are long cycle operations, and it's very expensive to establish the buildings and the facilities up front. But as the portfolio kind of matures and ages, the marginal cost of it does reduce, adding one more seat, adding one more child into the conversation, into the class. So I think that's where the opportunity set really is very, very powerful. And we've seen that in lots of ways. So I think the interesting question is whether you can somehow measure the efficiency of execution, and whether you can somehow say, well, is it possible that if a parent is paying for everything that they get, that they hold you accountable more so than any other regulator ever could, and that they have an option set in front of them from which they can choose. And if your offering is weak and or overly expensive and or kind of poor, that they can choose with their feet to go somewhere else. And that's a very powerful kind of conscience to be responsible to. And I think so. Those are the kind of some of the concepts I think that we must remind ourselves. So I really believe there's incredible opportunity in this country to have much closer collaboration between particularly government spheres and the various sort of organizations, because we need each other. It's nonsensical that everybody must have their own little facilities and their own everything, and somehow must look after a narrow kind of group or society or a community or an area. We must be able to share and collaborate more than what we do.
There's a place under the sun for each of us.
Well, there's that. I mean, so I marvel. I drove 20 kilometers yesterday. I was like, I'm sad when I see that traffic lights don't work for 20 kilometers. And when there's no stop signs, and when I've got to guess how quick I can drive, I get these WhatsApps from my rental company if I'm too quick. But the point is, it's sad. It shouldn't be like it. We must hold each other accountable to higher standards.
Now that was the conversation on ethical leadership as well. Got one question here. Thanks.
My name is Marius. Very practical example of shifting from rule-based to principle-based. And congratulate you and your teams, because there's people behind you that have done it. I must confess I don't know enough, so I'm going to ask a question which is you can help me out whether it's relevant. My children were in a public school, so I know the structures of a school governing body. Within the concept of schools as moral communities, which is a discussion I've had with a number of people, and something that I've got in the back of my head. Do you have a school governing body at every school, which means you have a two-tier structure, governance structure? And how do you expect that member, I'm assuming you do have a school governing body at every school.
Not quite, but I'll explain. So,
the similar structure that you have, how's your expectations of those community members, if I can call them, that's part of your journey, is your expectations different from that you find in a public or in a private?
Yeah. Okay, so it's an important, it's a deep question, and I'm going to try and deal with it succinctly, but it's complex. It's not so, I'm not going to be quick, so bear with me. We've got kind of three layers of schooling in this country, and I explained earlier the different types. So where parents pay a fee, what we've created in our law is to allow a community where they pay a fee to participate in the running of the school for the people, by the people, if you want to quote the kind of American concept. And of course, the higher the fee, to some extent, the more important their participation in the outcome. And by and large, that's yielded really impressive outcomes in many instances, but there's been some problems as well. Because fundamentally, when you sit in a school hall and you vote 5 people into and I've served on a school governing body, I understand it well. And the governing body that I served on had 5 CEOs of 5 different industries with incredible kind of insight, experience, skill, expertise, knowledge, all that kind of stuff. And it was a very, very, very impressive kind of sort of process. But that's not available to everybody. And so you get widely disparate outcomes, and then you get challenges where people kind of hijack the thing, and there's all sorts of so there's complexity. But fundamentally, to be good at school, you need to be good at a lot of things. You've got to be good at people management and industrial relations. You've got to be good at an academic syllabus. You've got to be good at legal issues, at compliance, at procurement, at debt collection, at running financial systems, at marketing, at sport, at culture, at maintaining your buildings, at building new things. And the list goes on. It's a really complex world, and I don't think we have enough of a regard for the school leaders in our country for the incredible complexity that they actually have to sort of deal with, because most of them have the keys to facilities that cost somewhere between 100 and 400 million rand. That's a significant operation, often with 100 people and more working for them. So it's a complex world. So the SGB thing works very well if you've got a very professional school management team. You deal with a lot of stuff. You've got government oversight on a kind of a district or whatever basis, and then you've got the SGB influencing big decisions and typical investment decisions and so on. But the moment that you have too many staff and learner discipline issues, do you know how much time it takes and how complex that is to expect a parent who's actually got a job and a family to come and hang out at the school and participate in those things. So in our process, to answer your first question, we don't have an SGB in the context of that way. We have what we call parent representative councils, RPCs, where we invite parents to participate in the school experience, make it better, support us, whatever. But I don't expect, and I'm not devolving our responsibility to run the school to parents. So if you have a problem, talk to us directly. Don't feel like you must somehow gang up with other parents or whatever to somehow get things sorted out. It shouldn't have to be like it. Much like when you have a problem with Vodacom, you phone them. You don't phone your friends to say, well, how do I kind of solve, you know what I mean? So that's like an important distinction. So the RPC in our world is somewhat ceremonial, somewhat influential, but not nearly as responsible as what you see in the public sector. And that will continue. And it continues fundamentally as a mechanism and a tool for us to understand our customers, work closely with them, and kind of give them in that community the best we can. And then I guess to the moral sort of matter that you raised, we've got to be good at what we do all the time, every time, and we must be held to that account. And so we have a whole array of professionals in a central office who are experts at all of the things that I mentioned earlier, legal and so on and so on and so on, and buildings and maintenance and all the rest. And they support our schools to make the best possible decisions. And we spend about 600 million rand a year, at least, just to kind of refurbish, renovate, maintain and replace assets and expand our portfolio. That's a meaningful amount of money. So that calls for a lot of kind of governance and process, but obviously we execute that professionally at scale. Does that answer your question?
I've got a question online as well. The gentleman in the back, sorry, Nora, then this lady, and well, Peter, you've got a question for me online. Yes, sir.
Just two questions from myself. And of course, I can relate to what you are saying in terms of operational challenges in school responsibilities. Myself, I'm a head of a PBO and PTY recently. PBO and PTY is sometimes PBO, like as the process that QA is now taking as a training and development. But my first question relates to the effect of delisting in terms of composition of a board. I wanted to check what were the requirements, because I know for you to be registered as an NPO, you need to have a minimum of 8 independents. So I wanted to check whether you complied prior or post delisting. And then, okay, maybe let me just pitch the second question. In terms of, obviously, by virtue of being a PBO, and I would assume that already you have been granted a Section 18 certificate for tax exemption. I'm more interested on the conversation that we had with SARS in terms, because for you to be tax exempted, obviously, the indication should be that you are not a profit-making entity. But in terms of the ceiling, your money, your generating abilities, what was the cap from them? Because already you have people that are paying, which in a way demonstrate an ability to be financially independent. Now, what was the conversation in that particular VAT? And coupled with the fact that we'll be getting donation, yes, I understand it, because you can easily get that by virtue of being a PBO. So I'm saying, the money that we'll be getting by PBO and the school fees that we'll be getting from the learners. What was the conversation around there with SARS? Because from where I'm sitting, chances are indications were that you are financially sustainable. So how then do you argue for a tax exemption or being a PBO?
Can I maybe have a go? So just on the board question, compliant before and after, and that obviously has to be maintained. Again, that's reporting annually to SARS. They'll make sure of that. But you're right on the independence. So you do need to have members independent from the company and from each other, and that is complied with before and after. So it actually is easier given the requirements from a listing perspective. And then on your second question, it's an interesting question, and that was part of our intense engagement, because it is obviously unusual to have an operating entity, a business running as a PBO. But given the class of services, it ticks that box. So the education services it already provides, and then the memorandum of incorporation, so it's constitutional document, the objects which it can do and what it can use those funds for is clearly defined. So that's another guardrail. And then the main thing is, even if you make a surplus, you have to use that within a 12-month period for those objects. So the concern is not whether there's a surplus or not. The concern is, what are you allocating that surplus for? That's the key. And that's the oversight that SARS has over the operation. which is quite intense. The reporting is quite intense to make sure that that is the case. So I hope that answers.
But just to add to that, I think the issue is one of sustainability. In other words, if every charity, for lack of just to make it simple, if you had to run to naught at the end of the year and begin from naught the next year, that can't be good for your sustainability.
Not a sustainable model.
It can't be a healthy model. So SARS has an appreciation that you must collect the fees and you must kind of generate a surplus, and that you can't necessarily push a button and spend 200 million rand on capex or buildings like that. So I think there's an understanding that it remains within education, will be spent there, and there's probably a little bit of a lag in how that gets invested.
Okay, I want to cautious of the time as well. Shvin, you want to quickly, and then Peter will do us online.
Thank you. So from a strategy point of view, how much did Curro's strategy change going from for-profit making decisions into a surplus making direction? I know there's not much of a difference, but the fact that you're making money just to be sustainable. And
I think that the simplest way to think about life is in chapters. I think we tend to talk about things as if they're indefinite, but it's easier if you break it into chapters. And we're in a chapter now where we owe about 3 billion rand to 5 banks in this country. And we have an obligation to service that debt and to repay it. And that means that we must maintain a level of execution and of commercial sort of process that is pretty consistent with where we were. But as I alluded to much earlier, the things that happened on my desk is to some extent about those kind of things. What matters in classrooms, which is the real strategy about expanding access and about driving opportunity and potential, that strategy is just going from strength to strength to strength, and that's demonstrable across our portfolio. So I think it's not an or, it's an and. We're continuing as is because we've got obligations and we respect those. But simultaneously, that hasn't dulled. We've probably accelerated some of the things we want to do.
Which is a great. Peter, the online question.
I'm just talking on behalf of 3 people, Letitia Walters, Adrian from Square. They're asking questions about your operation in terms of what your feelings in terms of AI and the impact on education. Number 2, the issue of, are you going to expand, buying more property? Thirdly, sustainable energy. So to see, so that's the first operation question. And then the second question was very much around how you're going to govern yourself now without a board, without well, not with a board. I think the words are the worst. Without a governance framework dictated by the JSE, by requirements from a listed company, etc. How will you oversee that now as a PBO?
So I'm going to answer them in reverse. So the governance issue is relatively simple. We've maintained the highest possible standard in every possible way. We've been running our race under the floodlights, in front of the pavilion, in front of everybody for years. We're just going to keep running it, doing the same things in the same kind of way, and we'll be efficient. I mean, there's some arbitrary processes that may not be core and critical, but fundamentally, the board has the same expectation. Their reputations, my reputation, there's a lot, and the expectations of 72,000 learners. That's a pretty high standard to maintain. So from that perspective, I think it'll be robust, and we'll keep kind of running like that. Then let's go backwards. The third question was around energy efficiency. We are already running generators and solar panels and all those kind of things across our portfolio. We've had reasonably good kind of outcomes. Water is a big issue. We are actually not big energy users. So if you think about it, there's 200 school days in a year, and we use electricity between, say, 7 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon predominantly. You start stacking it up. That mitigates against significant investment in solar. But we've got 800,000 square meters of buildings with plenty of roof space, but we can't solar wheel into the ecosystem for other people who may need it. That's our conundrum, is we have a fantastic opportunity set, but we can't get it into the system at the moment because wheeling is clumsy and access into the grid, putting back in is complex. So, but I do worry about water quality, water provision, water sort of safety, and so on. So there's much that we're doing in that regard to make sure that our campuses can sustain themselves for days without water. I think it's a big issue on our collective horizon as a society. We need to spend a lot more time solving for that. So that's energy, but actually water is the issue, I think. And then your second question.
And the expansion on property and then AI.
So we're going to do more, okay, much more. But I said earlier, you was talking chapters. We're in a chapter now of discipline, of rigor, and of making sure that we meet our commitments. It's incongruent to give away when you owe 3 billion rand. So we must meet our commitments, and we must focus on that. And then there's another chapter, and there'll be many more, and they'll be great. Long after me and long after everybody else. And then your first question was around AI.
Impact on your operation.
So it's only like the biggest issue of our day. So the concepts are, and you know this, I mean, you guys are well read and so on. We're living in an age where change is at the speed, not of steam engines or of industrialization or of mass mechanization or of computing, but at the speed of thought, which is pretty quick. And it's a fascinating kind of issue. And we don't have the answers. And anybody who pretends that they do, that's just not true. Because nobody has the real answer. But as a society, as a civilization, we've found ways to navigate new territories forever, and we will navigate this. From our perspective, the way we look at it is that we have to prepare our learners for a future. Our parents expect it, the learners expect it, and we think it's our obligation. And that future will include a whole array of things. But the first thing that we must do is make sure that they are confident, creative, that they can communicate, that they can collaborate. Those are attributes, and attributes are very, very important. Sometimes more so than technical acumen, because the technical acumen is now going to be available everywhere. So that's it. But distinguishing between being able to ask the right questions, that's the new art form. So I think from our side, we see teachers as users, and we see learners as users, and society as users of AI, and we see teachers with technology, not teachers or technology without teachers. And if you have a child, and if you take your 10-year-old or your 13-year-old or your whatever, learners have so much development to do. That must be much more than about screens and about tech. So it's about how we prepare them, their attributes and their ability to deal with change. That's really going to matter. And that's where we spend a lot of time on. And then we expose them in lots of ways, robotics, coding. We've got exceptional kind of syllabus to deal with that and to give them exposure to this stuff. But it must be about the learner in the first instance.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thanks for that. There's so many more things we could talk about. You in the room have the benefit of having both, our speakers for over a cup of coffee, so you can get Logan or Cobus in a corner over the room is round. So okay, let's see how we're going to. There's a nice challenge for all of you. Get them in a corner. But I think I would like to, and for those online as well, I want to wrap up with two things, takeaways for me from here. One is the issue around purpose. ISO 37000 says that the starting principle of governance is your purpose. That's your North Star. Now, some companies, I was thinking, like, if your business is about education, what a wonderful opportunity, what a wonderful purpose to have, to also make you want to get up and dress up and show up every day because you can make a real impact. For us here at Third Rock, we say we get up and dress up and show up because we want to live in a society that's fueled by well-governed and ethical corporate citizens throughout, at all spheres, at all levels of society, and kind of this concept of profit with purpose that you referred to, surplus with purpose. And I really want to encourage, all of you, our audience here and online as well, to really go and think about what the purpose is. Why does your business exist? How do you align the decisions you make with that North Star? How does any major decision help or hinder what you're trying to achieve as an organization? It gives just such a great kind of compass for you to move forward and to ensure that you do so in a sustainable model. There are, books like Net Positive that the CEO of Unilever wrote, and the subheading of the book is How Courageous Companies Give More Than They Take. And that's the mindset that we need in all kinds of businesses in this country, and what we at Through a Rock also try and assist, because also your stakeholder, I would have loved to speak more about your different stakeholders, their expectations, how you engage with them as well. But as a last point from my side, from a governance perspective, and again, a topic I would have loved to address and delve in more. There's this misconception out there that it's only listed companies that are required to apply the King 5 principles, which is so wrong. I was explaining again last night that if you think about governance, it's about leadership. It's about effective and ethical leadership that results in certain outcomes for an organization. And a code like King 5 says, we think you should lead to achieve those outcomes. And in order to achieve those outcomes, here are 13 principles that we think are universally applicable. You listen to you think school, it's a business, risk, compliance, assurance. He's got all of those on his radar, as well. So it's applicable for I chair the board of the Vasfontein. We have got a fairly Christian school, which is, we've got 400 learners versus the 72,000, but we also have to apply those principles and try to achieve those outcomes. But our context is different. That's why we do it differently than what, Logan in PSG and Kobus at Curro does. But again, I want to challenge you. Go back and look at your organization, look at the context, and ask yourself, how are we leading in a responsible, ethical, effective manner to ensure the long-term sustainability of this organization for the benefit of all its stakeholders? And to look at King, the fact that you're not listed definitely does not mean that you can kind of just push that aside. There's huge benefit. I said I can write a book of my stories over 35 years of seeing the benefit of being well governed. You just kind of alluded to, it was so easy to pivot because we had those structures. That's but one of the reasons. But I've also have those stories of the results of the absence of good governance. And I really want to encourage all of you to really take that to heart as well. So with that, Speaker, Kobus, Logan, thanks for coming up all the way to the chilly Gauteng. Thank you for those of us in the room.
Caitlin, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So kind.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Peter, you're going to Caitlin. Apologies.
It's just because we've been sitting for quite a while. We're going to just take a 5-minute comfort break. So if I can ask you, you're going to take about 5 minutes and then we will reconvene. So there's some water in that, but if you can keep it to 5 minutes, we can make this work.
Shakur. Yes, no, you did it fine. Completely the first time. From medical they are very glad to collaborate with us, especially for the female members on helping them on the government. That's talking about understanding the rules, when you operate a business for very well. We can work, yes, we'll talk. What we can also do is say that most just will come from the syllabus. And then I'll what do you do? Yes, that was sure. Yes, that's it. Victoria. Yeah. Sweet. That's what's good. Okay, so I'm in a working class. No, sure, yeah, I'm from here. Oh, okay. Yeah. We just say yes. So what I think is they help.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
For example, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just about you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to introduce Caitlin Gottschalk. She is a director of the firm Gottschalk's Attorneys, and what is amazing with her is that she actually is counsel to corporates, boards, etc., and actually has the ability to really translate some of what we see from a legal technical perspective into really understandable conversation. One of the most amazing things about her is that she actually wasn't a lawyer initially. She's got a BCom in communications, which personally I appreciate because she can communicate very clearly to me at my level serious legal technical issues. She is also counsel to Fluid Rock, and we had to force her back out of Italy in the last few weeks. I'm stand here in front of her. So, Caitlin, I'm going to hand over to you to share a bit of the insights that you've gained in terms of governance and what we've seen specifically being litigated recently. And I'm handing over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I just want to thank Fluid Rock for hosting us this morning. And I don't see Logan, and I know Quibus has just left. Oh, but Logan, thank you very much for the share. I think that was really, really interesting. I personally would hope to see another transaction like that. Some good governance and good things for the public would be nice. So this morning, I'm going to cover two pieces of case law that were decided in the first half of this year. I just want to point out that these are not landmark judgments. They're not Concord or SCA level. Rather, they are just nice practical examples of what is fiduciary duty. We all talk about it, but what is it in reality? What actions give rise to that duty? So the first matter I'm going to discuss is Disprotech versus Suit Science. And what is interesting about this judgment is that it relates to the fiduciary duty of employees, not of a director. When we think about fiduciary duty, we normally think of it at a director level and not at an employee level. So who are the characters of the story? Hopefully we will find out soon if the slide changes. Essentially, in the story, there are two camps. There we go. There are two camps. On the one side, we have Dispro, the victim of our story, the company that's going to suffer the fiduciary breach. And on the other side, we have Suit Science, a company established by two former employees of Dispro. What I want to pause on just for a second on this slide is the titles attached to the employees. Their titles were technician supervisor / technician and senior and data analysis specialist. No mention of management, no mention of being at an executive or director level. So who is Dispro? Dispro is a very, very unique company. In the judgment, they state that it was the first and one of a kind in Africa. It was the only company in Africa offering the particular service that it does. For context, it does diesel particulate monitoring, not something I know anything about, but how they built this company over time, over a very long time, is they went and formed a very close strategic relationship with a company called Saxon in Germany, established an exclusive relationship with them, and built a unique piece of software on top of the Saxon equipment. So it's important to understand they did not use the standard software that the Saxon equipment came with. So their competitive advantage was the unique software with the exclusive machines. On to our employees, the protagonists. Both of them, although they had these more operational titles, they were key employees. They were at a senior level. They directly negotiated a lot of customer and supplier contracts. And most interestingly, they actually signed the exclusive distribution agreement with Saxon on behalf of Dispro. So they completely understood that exclusive relationship. But as any successful business will suffer, if you're doing well, making a surplus, making a profit, someone wants a piece of that pie. And in this case, it was those two employees. So the two employees, deciding they want their own piece of that, started to plan a strategic departure. And the first red flag for Dispro was they discovered that one of their employees had instructed the developers to make changes to that code. And when they took a look at the change requests, they realized that that did not fit the operating model or how the business case would work. So they suspended the employee and they began investigating. And what do they find on his computer? An Excel spreadsheet called Dispro 2.0. A budget planning on the version 2 of Dispro. So they have the inquiry, quite contentious, as you can imagine. And the employee pleads innocence. I'm not starting a competitor. I'm committed to Dispro. Let me back in. So they let him back in. And what do? They download and email an entire copy of that confidential IP, the software. They email it to themselves. And then what? They resign. Bye, we'll see you later. They resign, they serve their notice period, and 11 days after finishing, they had a trading entity. Suit science is established. And not only is it established, it's ready to service clients. 11 days, I wish I could start a company in 11 days. So what did they do? The first thing that those two employees did was go and buy Saxon equipment. They knew, they signed the exclusive agreement, but they went and bought Saxon equipment. So now they have two of the three elements to be successful. They had the IP, the software. They had the machines to run that software. All they needed was a client. So what did they do? Start soliciting clients directly. They were so arrogant that they went and sat in pitches of Dispro and then would do the same pitch to that client thereafter. And what is interesting here is when the court looked at the written proposals submitted to the clients, they were exact mirrors of each other, a copy and paste of the proposal. Could you be more obvious in your replication? So your business is at risk. What do? You run off to the lawyers and you issue a cease and desist letter. Stop soliciting my clients. Stop trying to interfere with my business. What does Suit write back? No. Find a short cliff and take a long walk. We're not interested. And in that letter, the attorneys on behalf of suit made a very bold accusation. They wrote that they were unlikely to take any fiduciary claims seriously. And this, guys, is one of the things that got the courts back up. They said that this line alone shows a complete disregard for the law. There was no intention of them to act lawfully. Oh, I think we've missed a slide. No. So, what were the consequences? The court obviously found against suit, and they made very interesting orders. They ordered an 18-month trading ban that suit and the two employees could not compete at all with Dispro. That's death if you're a young business for 18 months. They interdicted them from disclosing confidential information. They ordered all information to be returned, whether confidential or not. And here's one of the most interesting things out of this case, is they interdicted them from using any information, whether confidential or not, for personal gain. And this is something I want to highlight out of this, is that in springboarding, which is what they've done here, it's not only the confidential information that is protected, it's any information that I gain through my employment. We definitely skipped some slides, but that's okay. So what are the key lessons on this? First of all, that the courts will protect confidential information and IP. They will step in to protect those rights. Employees have a fiduciary duty, both during and after employment. It is not limited to your directors. Springboarding, which is the process of using someone else's efforts to jump ahead so that you can start very quickly, will attract a remedy from the court. The court will do something to stop that unlawful competition. And finally, which I've already emphasized, is that even non-confidential information will be protected if you use it to springboard. So let's move on to the second matter I want to discuss, which is a bit more traditional. It does involve the director. And this one really deals with if there is competing or conflicting interests, how does it lead to a breach of fiduciary duty? I think declarations of interest are taken sometimes a bit lightly at a board level. Well, this is going to prove to you the personal liability that might accrue to you if you don't disclose properly. It's important to understand the history that led to this judgment. So in about 2014, there was a company called Nucleus, a logistics company, that was approached by a much larger group logistics company to purchase the business out of Nucleus. There were 3 shareholders, Miss Rooks, the main character of the story, as well as 2 others. The 2 others exited, they get paid out for their shares, and Mrs. Rooks is retained. The business is moved to Core Logistics. She's appointed as the MD. And very important, she retained 20% shareholding in that company. And you'll hear this in a lot of rooms. That's the skin in the game. You expect if someone has an equity stake in a business, their dedication to furthering that business is going to be cemented. So she joins this large group. Mrs. Rooks is absorbed into the group, but there's pain. She really struggles with joining a much bigger corporate environment. She pushes back, and the court even comments on her arrogant attitude about pushing back. And because of all this push, the group eventually agrees to ring-fence the operations of Core Logistics, subject to 2 things. the group operational rules, such as authority matrices, payment processes, etc., and the shareholders' agreement, which they signed. She was effectively left with freedom in her day-to-day management, but always subject to these higher, I'm going to say, constitutional rules. But then, in 2017, the group CEO starts seeing some funny, large payments going out of core logistics. And he wonders to himself, why are these individuals getting such big com payments all of a sudden? They start investigating. They engaged Miss Rooks. He emails her, what's going on? She replies from an email associated with a company called Windsor Logistics. Group CEO has never heard of this company, no disclosure about this company, and starts digging deep. He finds out that Miss Rooks has used core logistics to fully establish Windsor. She went as far as, firstly, taking staff from core and having them train the Windsor logistics staff on how the operations must work. She took all the systems and structures of core and replicated them inside Windsor. I mean, I'm going to use the word the audacity of Miss Rooks. She charged her business trips to go and canvass Windsor logistics clients to the group. I mean, blatant. And the court comments a lot that even when she was under cross-examination, she refused to admit fault. She admitted she did this, but saw absolutely no problem with it. You would think that's all. Following those large commission payments, they found that that commission was never due. Where it was due, she inflated it. And in certain instances, she was passing fraudulent credit notes. The court said this demonstrated a dishonest financial conduct that happened regularly, not as a once-off. And as a final example of Miss Rooks being unable to see a difference between her interests and that of the company, Miss Rooks appointed her mother to do some renovation on core logistics business premises. There's a lot of debate whether these improvements ever happened. The group's position was quite simple. If you entered a contract at this value with your mother, it was your duty to disclose that relationship. She said, no, it's two companies. The court did find this, of course, was exceeded authority and was a mandatory disclosure that was not made. And they interestingly rely a lot on the common law position. They do acknowledge the Companies Act, the fiduciary duty, the duty to disclose, but they said at a common law level, she had a duty to act in the best interest of that company. And I think in a lot of case law, in a lot of matters that are dealt with, we forget that common law requirement, never mind the Companies Act. So what did they rule? They made her personally pay 1.1 million rand back to court, which I don't see anyone shrugging too much. But then they declared her delinquent. 7 years. And that is a death sentence if you are a professional. And I think, as Quibus was speaking, a declaration of delinquency is a declaration that you're unprofessional. You are not someone with ethics and not a leader. So I see it as possibly the most serious sanction you can receive other than going to jail. And the automatic consequences of this are you are barred as serving for 7 years. You cannot serve as a director. It's not a insolvency type situation where you can get that lifted. That is a ban that's going to sit there unless the judgment is overturned. Soon as you are declared delinquent, you may be personally liable. So while she might have gotten off lucky with the 1.1 here, if you added a 0 to that number, she would have still been liable. There's no consideration that you're an individual. This, of course, also affects your reputation. Would be surprised to see any good corporate citizen hire someone who had a previous delinquency order. And ultimately, if there are further claims down the road, the shareholders and other stakeholders can come back and take another bite at you. So what do we learn? What are the professional takeaways of this matter? Disclose fully and disclose early. If there is any relationship between you and that transaction, you need to disclose it. Doesn't matter that it's your cousin 3 times removed. You are related. Corporate opportunities belong to the company. Just because she saw opportunity for Windsor Logistics to establish itself doesn't mean she was entitled to take it. She had to take that opportunity to call logistics. And then finally, I really want to emphasize this. Personal liability for directors is real. I often have people sitting in my office saying, I'm a director. There's no liability for me. It's untrue. If you really upset your shareholders, they can hold you personally liable. So I hope that was nice and quick. I am going to be staying for the networking session. So if you have any questions, if you would like to discuss any of these topics, please do approach me. Thank you.
Just let Penelope and ask if there are any questions at the moment.
Caitlin, thanks. On that first case with Suit and the 2 former employees, was there any inquiry into them fitting the definition of prescribed officers?
No, there actually wasn't.
Sure, it's curious.
And that's why it's so interesting is that there's none of the normal things you would consider a prescribed officer, director, none of that sat. The one thing I would point out, because we've actually dealing with a case like this, if you are not a director formally appointed, although you have the fiduciary duty, they can't declare you delinquent. There is no provision in the Companies Act for a ghost director or shadow director.
Just, in terms of that first case, to what extent, in your knowledge, that companies built in this kind of training to their employees, that this something like this is real?
I would say none. I don't think most companies themselves realize that there is this level of fiduciary duty.
So there's no training, basically, that's available.
And maybe Fluid Rock will start. Any other questions? Thank you for your time, guys.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end you. Can I just say thank you very much to all our speakers that assisted us this morning and to help us hold this conversation. I hope it was valuable to you. Thank you for everybody attending, those of you online as well. I really appreciate your attendance, but secondly, also the network that is here. So may I please invite you to stay and have a cup of coffee. There is some more eats for you. And of course, as Caitlin so rightly have said, we do train in fiduciary duties as well as the director's responsibilities, board responsibilities. And we really go to that extent where we as Fluid Rock also assist you, not only by educating you, but also assisting you as a partner and advisory to do that. So all our colleagues are here. You will see them around with Fluid Rock badges on. If you want to have a chat with them, more than welcome to you, or to do that. So can I just say thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Thank you.